A few words in Italian, but now I turn to English.
I think I understand.
Buonasera a tutti e benvenuti. Siamo ancora, personalmente devo dire, entusiasti ma anche molto stanchi della settimana di celebrazioni che abbiamo avuto e che oggi arriva un po' a concludere una delle attività importanti del What is a Museum, che per noi è stato una delle attività di riflessione su questo bicentenario. Siamo partiti, vi ricorderete, con la dottoressa Barbara Iatta dei Musei Vaticani, è venuto poi il professor Osanna, direttore generale dei musei in Italia, e poi abbiamo fatto un viaggio internazionale che ci ha portato in vari luoghi, dal Louvre. Laurence Descartes era qui poco tempo fa, siamo già stati a Berlino con Hermann Patzinger, siamo andati in Inghilterra con Gabriele Finaldi, ad Amsterdam con Taco Tibiz, siamo passati per Madrid con Miguel Falomi, siamo arrivati al Cairo con il professor Ali Abdelahim e abbiamo cercato di capire come funzionino oggi i musei in Europa, ma anche in Egitto, e quali siano le domande principali che i musei oggi si pongono. Adesso passo subito all'inglese per interloquire con il nostro ospite. So, thank you and welcome. We are very honored to have you here tonight. A full house for our last meeting. And as I was saying, it has been a wonderful trip. We started with the Vatican Museum, the Director General Massimo Osanna, and then we went to Paris, London, Madrid, Amsterdam, discussing with our colleagues, and of course Cairo, about what is a museum of the future. And I was very keen in inviting you because we can say that the Humboldt Forum and all the discussion connected with the Humboldt Forum, to me, has been one of the most relevant cultural phenomenon of Europe, not only of Berlin and of Germany, but of Europe. How the importance of the institution that you are running in the contemporary discourse about museum. But let's start from the beginning. Museum, but the name is Forum, something that I'm really intrigued about. What does the name Forum convey, and what is the difference compared to a museum, and how does it relate and it function within the Museum Insel in Berlin?
Yeah, thank you so much for inviting me. And before, I'd like to say that it's a great pleasure and privilege for me being here, because I'm not in charge of a museum, but of a forum. Our motto is we are more than a museum, and being part of this honorable list of colleagues, it's really a privilege. Thank you so much, and congratulations to your jubilee. And I think it's a very good reason to celebrate this bicentenario in this way, discussing about the future and not only about the past. A forum is a marketplace. It's a place gathering people, bringing ideas and perspectives together, and that is why we are glad that the decision was made by the German Parliament 20 years ago to rebuild the Royal Palace, which is also a controversial idea, but to name it after the brothers Humboldt and call it Humboldt Forum. And that means it is not a museum, it is how to describe, it is a complex cultural institution with an international global perspective. And my job as a general director is bringing different partners together. So it's perhaps, how to describe it, perhaps it's like a shared apartment with institutions having no experience in sharing, because we are hosting two state museums, the Museum of Asian Art and the Ethnological Museum, which belong to the Foundation of Prussian Cultural Heritage. And Hermann Patzinger, you mentioned him, was here as part of your lectures as well. And the Humboldt University with parts of the university collections, but also with the Science Center. I've brought some images, if you want,
yes,
I
please.
can share it with you. And then the City Museum as well. So different partners, permanent partners. And then we have many other international partners coming from different fields. So archives, NGOs, community representatives, museum colleagues, artists, monks from Tibet, or religious leaders from the Amazon. So they are coming together in a form which is called the Global Cultural Assembly, and that's the fixed partner in the building. And so we tried to bring this together, and so we are the permanent fellows at this forum, at this marketplace.
Which is really amazing. We were just discussing a few minutes before starting this official talk that I liked this name of forum, and I think there is something that this museum could learn a lot about, because in our plans, we started the celebration of the bicentennial. We will finish in September next year, and part of the renovation is the building is to have a new piazza, and piazza is, well, what it was a forum, what was an agora, what is even a meeting place. And we are starting thinking right now how this Piazza Egizia will be able to work, because it will be a vital, a new urban center within the city, functioning in a parallel way to the museum, but also meant to challenge the museum to engage in a discourse. And I was mentioning you, I liked it so much that the same name, Forum, was given to the Abrahamic family house in Abu Dhabi, where you have a mosque, a synagogue, and a church, and underneath you have what they don't want to call museum, but is a forum. There is interactive narrative to show how the rites du passage are essential in our society. In the meantime, also they try to say we're all children of Abraham, and let's look at our similarities and how it works. And in the meantime, there you have a rabbi, a priest, and an imam that with their students and schools that can be in touch and in dialogue with each other. And in what you were saying, I even see going back to the birth of museum, actually, because if we see when the museum was born in Athens as a place dedicated to the muse, but in the meantime was also a place of dialogue, where Plato and Aristotle would go to be in dialogue, and Ptolemy, the first Soter in Egypt, copied this example. If you want to show us some slides.
Yes, I think I make it very short, but we are comparing to the other institutions which were here presented, we are a baby. So we opened finally 2 years ago, so in September 2022. So it's really a brand new building, and perhaps not everyone have had the opportunity to see it. Yeah, so it is. It's Italian design. The architect Franco Stella from Vicenza won an international architectural competition in 2008. And on 3 sides, it's a reconstruction of a Baroque palace. And on the other side, it is a very modern architecture. That's a short trailer giving you an idea even of the dimension. So this is one of our courtyards, and you see different galleries, different contents. That's one of the science centers of the Humboldt University. And cultural events play an important role. Discourses, open-air concerts, contemporary art, of course, eating, dancing, music. So that's the Humboldt Forum. And perhaps it was a little bit too fast. That's the building from the other side, looking like the Royal Palace, which was there for 8 centuries. So at least a Baroque building, which was heavily damaged during the Second World War, but it was still there, half ruined. And it was torn down by the communist regime in 1950, and it was replaced by the central building of the GDR, the German Democratic Republic, I studied at the Humboldt University, so I grew up in East Germany, and my immatriculation was in this Palace of the Republic, which was a very popular spot, but also full of asbestos. And then it was turned down after unification. First it was closed, and then after 10 years of very intense debate, it was turned down completely because the federal parliament decided to rebuild the royal palace. You can imagine that this was also a very emotional question until today. Yes, and this hybrid structure is, starts on the outside, continues in the interiors. It's our main hall with one of our lecture halls here, a movable one. And then we have the huge galleries for ethnological collections here from Palau, and also permanent installations of caves with Buddhist murals from the Uigurian area in nowadays China, boats from Oceania. We have also new boats. We commissioned one group on Fiji to build a new one. And of course, we are discussing contemporary issues like plastic rubbish in the ocean. So this was an installation by art students here in this hall. We also have contemporary architectural scenographies within the galleries. This was designed by Wang Shu, the only Chinese Pritzker Prize winner. Here this roof structure, which covers the gallery for showing or dealing with the relations between China and Europe for over centuries. Also contemporary art, the tea house by Ai Weiwei, and also some other spots like this new Japanese tea house, which can also be used for tea ceremonies. This is an exhibition curated by the Cities Museum titled Berlin Global. It's not the history of the city of Berlin, but these are more in a center for experiences and learnings about the different relations between the world and Berlin. So focusing on revolution, on fashion, on entertainment, and so on. That's the Science Center from the Humboldt University, bringing the collections. Some of them were rooted in the Kunstkammer in the Berliner Schloss, which was established in the 17th century, in contact, in relation to current research in different dimensions. Of course, we do a lot of outreach and education programs, a lot of dance and music and kickers. I mean, football, table football was our main festival in summer according to the European Championships. So we are looking what brings people together in the world. Food plays an important role, non-material culture. And of course, we are dealing with the colonial past. The Benin bronzes, which are here on display, are not longer owned by the state museums in Berlin. They are now permanent loans of the Republic of Nigeria because Germany decided to restitute them completely to Nigeria. And this was the beginning of a new relation to different activists, artists, groups, representative from communities in Nigeria, because for us restitution is not the end. Restitution could be a new beginning, and perhaps the Benin ensemble is a good one. And of course related with provenance research, with community representative, but the storages are not in the Humboldt Forum. They are still in Dahlem. This is an area in the southwest of Berlin where the museums were located after the Second World War. And to give you an idea, so we are talking about roughly 500,000 objects in the storages in Dahlem, and around about 20,000 objects are on display in the Humboldt Forum. Yeah, so that's it. Just to give you a short idea, and I'm sure next time in Berlin you have to come and to see it in origin.
Well, it is amazing. You say that you're a baby amongst the museum, but I can assure you that whenever you are in the Humboldt Forum, well, as a museum person, you feel like in paradise, to go from one pavilion to another, from one continent to another. The wonderful display, the interaction that you can have with different cultures is, to me, really amazing. You already mentioned and you showed us the bronzes of Benin and the fact that now they belong to Nigeria, and this is a permanent loan. The Humboldt Forum has been at the center of a lot of discussion and different ideas, opinion. A nice colleague of ours, Benedict Savoy, has expressed even fiercely against some of the features. How do you address the very difficult problem, which is, I'm talking because I'm trying to address it as well, and we would like to learn from you and to see how different strategies, the very difficult problem about decolonizing the collection, decolonize the narrative, and what is the kind of approach that one can have. Of course, you already mentioned provenance research, which is fundamental for all of us. You mentioned repatriation or restitution in case a decision is made, and a decision, in your case, in our case, has to be made by the parliament. I absolutely have no power whatsoever to make a decision on that, because the owner of the objects is the Republic, represented by the parliament. But you said the restitution is not the end of it, is also a new beginning. So how can we try to create a new narrative? How can we deal with these diasporic collections that we have? And how can we function in nowadays contemporary global society? I give you 6 days to answer.
This is stuff for a whole series of lectures. Okay. I'm a little bit picky. Say, okay, first, what means decolonizing a museum? This is a proper term quite often used by activists, but what does it mean seriously? In my eyes, it means rethinking the museum in a way that you are not longer the only one who is able to discuss about the stuff, the items, the so-called objects. So decolonizing means rethinking in way of ownership, of authorship, of display, of education programs, and so on. And that is why the first learning for me was you cannot do it alone. And that is why I understood why the famous speech of Macron, the French president, which he gave a couple of years in Ouagadougou, was not well received. It was well received by us, by the Europeans, and among activistic groups, which are important, or who are important. But if you talk with African colleagues or scholars or students, they say, oh no, this was an ongoing neo-colonial French attitude. The French president came and said, I know how it goes. I know and because he said during the next 5 years, we will create the opportunities to restitute all these cultural heritage back to Africa. And so from the African perspective, it was again without them. Don't talk about us without us, otherwise it's against us. So that's, I think, is a crucial lesson if you really want to decolonize museums. And then how to do it. That means, and with whom? So who is representing a source community or community of origin? How to deal with national institutions like national museums, which were for instance, in Africa, mostly established by colonial powers, and so on and so on. So it is a very, very complex thing, and it is at least not a legal one. So if you are discussing restitutions in terms of looted art from the Nazi period, you have previous private owners, Jewish families who were expropriated, who were sent to concentration camps and murdered, and so on, and you have the descendants. But this is also related to a different concept of ownership. So private ownership. So it belonged to a person or a family. In Cameroon, families have around 500 up to 600 members to whom you should restitute. So it is a completely different concept of ownership. It is more collective one. So, and what I've also learned is that we are very, very much focused on the objects of this term, who is in charge, who owns it, and I think who keep it as a treasure perhaps. But what I've learned during the last 6 years, so that's the time I'm working for the Humboldt Forum right now, is that I have to accept that there are completely different concepts of ownership. So perhaps that it is owned by the ancestors, for example, and not by the living people. That it is owned by a community, that non-material culture has a much higher importance than an object, and so on and so on. That's what I mean with, that's what I understand now if I'm talking about decolonizing a museum. So to make it short, a decolonized museum is a museum which is primarily for the people and for ideas, and then for the objects. So, and this is something, this is a complete turn in thinking, because usually curators and restorers are focused on objects and what's related to them. And if you start to think in this way, then perhaps you come up with new ideas about restitution, so in terms of digital restitution or circulation or copying something, to say, okay, or perhaps communities are really interested in being present and relevant in the Humboldt Forum, but in exhibitions which were curated by them, not by us, because they have a different approach to the collections. So I think this is at least more a moral question and not a legal one, and you cannot copy it, because the tradition and the roots of ethnological collections or museums of Asian art, so it starts with the terminology art versus ethnological objects, so they have a different history, and so you cannot copy it. So, and that is why I think you cannot say decolonizing museums in general, but perhaps a participatory approach to museums is something similar in different cases or with different collections.
Yeah, I do agree with you, and it's very difficult. I've been also wondering myself whether this all decolonized process is something that lives much more amongst the specialists, amongst the museums, curators, and far less in society at all. And also, as you said, whether it can be a unilateral decision taken again by Europe and not be put in dialogue. But here I come with a question relatively different, but since you are a relatively newborn forum within a well-existing and established museum INSO, which is UNESCO or heritage. My question is, how can we manage to connect with all parts of society? How can we manage to be inclusive, as we always claim that we want to be, but then the reality, at least in this museum, has shown us pretty much the difference. We have tried very hard in the past few years to implement different kind of activities, to go and reach out to different parts of society. And then it turned out that when we had a survey on our public to see, well, let's see what are the results, if we take out, as I say all the time, the deported, the children that do not choose to come here because they have to come because schools decide for them. But when I look at the adult population coming to the museum, almost 70% of them has a MA title or higher. We know that in this country, those who have an MA title are 30% of the population, so we're still exclusive. We were discussing with Miguel Falomir how is doing in Madrid. He has introduced also 2 hours free of charge in the evening to attract more people. But he said at the end of the day, those who come are either tourists that maybe they want to come very quickly in the evening, or people who live in Madrid in the neighborhood of the Prado that go out to have an aperitif and then they come inside the museum. My question to you is, this new concept of a forum, as you said, engaging community, engaging NGO, engaging university, creating really different stakeholders that they are saying in the museum. We saw artists, performances. Has it succeeded in enlarging, as far as you know, or do you already see a difference between the kind of attendance that the Hartmut Forum has compared to the more traditional museums within a museum in Insel, or not?
Perhaps it's a bit too early to answer it seriously, because in the beginning, of course, the Berliners, who are very curious, came in masses. So they flooded the Humboldt Forum. But then, now more and more tourism came back after COVID and so on. And right now we have 60% national and international guests, and 40% are from Berlin and the region. And interesting thing is that 1/3 is coming for sightseeing, just to enjoy the site. They are coming for the rooftop terrace. We have nice restaurants and bars, and they are coming just to stroll around. So we have a huge video panorama telling the story of the site, and perhaps just going through, meeting friends. So that's 1/3 of the visitors. Right now we have, by the way, a winter market, because we are a non-religious place or a super religious place. That's why it's not called Christmas markets. That's why it's called winter markets. That's also was a long debate about this. But last year we had around 500,000 visitors just coming for the winter market, having absolutely no idea what's going on in the building. They just wanted to be there having mulled wine or so. And 1/3 is coming for cultural events, like concerts, screenings. We have a series of screenings in this huge courtyard you see here. During the summertime, I mentioned this table football festival, or tourney. So yeah, kind of a championship, according to the European Championship. Of course, there were also tours up to the Mexican galleries talking about playing different ball games in ancient Mexican traditions. But this was not the main reason. But we talked more about this, do you say kicker in Italian? This football on tables.
Yes, I don't know, calcetto in Italian, sì.
So, and you find it worldwide, everywhere. If you be in the Senegal or in Singapore or somewhere in Argentina, everywhere you find it. And it's absolutely easy going. You need no language, no communication. It doesn't matter if you are older or less educated. So, and people started immediately playing, because we put more than 100 of these kicker things in the building and also in the surrounding area, and they started immediately playing.
Which is very interesting. Sorry if I interrupt you, but I was invited in September to a festival which is under the patronage of UNESCO in Verona. It's called Toccati, where people from all over the world comes to have popular games together, and it's incredible how gaming is uniting peoples, because also it says you're the same place, you have rules, you have to adhere to rules, and then it doesn't matter.
And especially youngsters are really keen in playing games, because all these digital components are not that interested. Of course they are important, but what we realized is that these easy things like puzzles or chess or whatever, it works. And then 1/3 of our visitors are coming for the galleries, for the museums and the exhibitions. So it is really different structures of visitors who are coming to us. And then we are offering special programs, for instance, special opportunities. For the 3rd time this year, this winter, we opened Just a Warm Space in collaboration with a social welfare organization for the underprivileged, the poorer people in Berlin. And so it is a space which was previously planned as a museum shop, but it didn't work properly because it's located not on a good place, and that's why the company which runs the museum shops, we have several of them, closed this space. And so it's there. And then we said, okay, because we had this energy crisis, the war against the Ukraine, and we have this increasing prices for energy and heating, and so we said, okay, let's open the door. And you see, this is a very powerful architecture. And it is very impressive, and it takes a lot of trust to come over this threshold if you feel yourself not invited. And so in the first year we had around 10,000 guests. We are talking about guests, not visitors in this case. Last year we had around 15,000, and we will see what happens this year. And so they can have a warm space, newspapers, some games, and coffee and tea for free, and that's it. And a good word. And they are not obliged to visit a museum or a gallery or an exhibition also, but we offer this. And then slowly they are coming. Some of them are coming regularly. They know, okay, we are welcomed. And after the 3rd or the 4th or the 5th week, they say, okay, perhaps if it's not so crowded, and if we are not surrounded by so many others, perhaps in the early morning or in the late afternoon, perhaps we can have a look upstairs. Okay, and then they start talking, oh yes, I also went to museums before I was divorced, or whatever. So, and this is, it's really touching, and I think this is also the idea of a forum having no expectations, to say everyone is welcome. And I think this is something that because I mentioned, it's first a place for the people, and then for the objects. And the objects and the stories we can tell and all the narratives are a reason for coming and a reason for gathering. So that's the understanding how we want to continue. And so we are a learning institution, and we have to see how it works.
It's so nice that you put stress on people. I was thinking of a book of some years ago written by Peter Sames that was called From the Object-Centered Museum to the Visitor-Centered Museum. This kind of switch that we have made, but somehow, we always publish a picture of the galleries without people inside, but then I think the only thing that the ministry asks me every year is how many visitors did you have? And so somehow, I don't know, we take out the people as it were. When we want to show the museum, we want to show the collections, and probably in there we do a mistake. We should show the collection, the people within the collection, because I was reading a book written by Giulia Greco. She's an Italian historian and expert of museum studies. She wrote this huge book, very seminal for Italy, called Decolonizing Musei, Decolonize the Museums. And in the beginning, she has an interview with a keep conservator at the British Museum, who says, during COVID, when the museum was closed, we started noticing a large decay of the objects, because the objects had found a kind of balance in between the humidity and the increased temperature that people brought inside. And so if then all in a sudden 6 million visitors do not come, the objects had to adapt in a different way. And this curator said the objects had learned to breed with the people, which is very poetic if you think, but it's something that we keep forgetting, that the objects were also made by people, belonged to people, that meant something to people, that meant also something for people who collected them and put it here. They mean things to people who conserve them, who study them. Actually, they have a kind of social network around the objects, and I like very much your perspective in trying to building it up. A provocative question. So you say, of course, the visitors matter, but how do you find a balance with the objects? Are the objects, in a view, come to a second place? Are the objects only used in a kind, I'm being provocative of course, to entertain the people, or still the objects remain to have their role within an exhibition space?
Of course they have their role, and they are the reason why we are so active, because I want to say that I'm not longer talking about objects, or I try to learn a new term, because for many communities worldwide, these items, these artifacts are not objects. They are cultural belongings in a way, that they have a special spiritual value, for instance, or they are not dead. They are part of the family. They are documents of the past as well as of the future. And when I've been this afternoon in your new designed galleries, congratulations, by the way, standing in front of these gods from the pharaonic period, and it came into my mind as they've been not designed as objects for a museum. They're the divine whatever. So you are more an expert than I am, but it is something that that makes it difficult. For instance, some of these cultural belongings are not allowed to be touched or shown to men. They are made for women only. So, and if you talk with community representatives and they say, okay, you have to create a safe space only for women where you can exhibit these cultural belongings, because no women are allowed, not girls, only women are allowed to see these cultural belongings. And if you really take it seriously, this way of collaboration and cooperation, then you have to design a new way of exhibiting these cultural belongings. Or they say it's not longer allowed to put them online, because they are made for a completely different purpose, and it's not valuable, it is not acceptable that they are accessible online. So, and we are very, very proud that we put everything online, so they said, okay, we are so good, and you can walk through the net and see and find everything. So, and this is something that brings a new meaning, a new importance to these so-called objects, formerly known as objects, cultural belongings. And in other parts of the museums, it's different. So if you talk with collectors from Asia or so, of course, they are talking about objects, Chinese porcelain, for instance. So it is, and now I think it's a great challenge to develop a new, we call it narrative, or a new storyline, and to say, okay, just last week we opened an exhibition about the histories of Tanzania, and as a kind of respect, you have to put off your shoes before entering the exhibition space. you are on special mats, which were made in Tanzania because you are entering a private space, which is also related to colonial crimes and also restitutions and so on. But it's also an interesting experience to say, okay, please put off your shoes. I'm talking about disabled or handicapped people and so on. We have a lot of trouble to how to manage it, but it is also, it is really a new experience. It smells differently. Not because of the feet of the, but of the mat. But it is, so this is a kind of a new way how to enter. And there's the same cultural belongings, the same formerly known as objects, things in the galleries, but it's a different approach. And to say, okay, and also to learn that it doesn't matter how many objects, but what stories are told about them. So that's also, it's on the same level. And that there are interviews, for instance, so that people can share their visions and their perspectives on the objects with the audience, so that the people are present during permanent opening hours in permanent exhibitions, having their own voice. We are not talking about them. So this is, it is new. It is sometimes, it's also sometimes full of stress and disappointments, and in terms of money and time. So it is, you cannot realize an exhibition in our German way of managing exhibitions. So, okay, that's also we have to learn. But it needs, for instance, trust, so that people say, okay, in this exhibition about the histories of Tanzania, for instance, one of the mottos was without so I'm looking for the English word, without a permission by the communities, you are not allowed to present the cultural belongings in Berlin. And how to reach this? One of the possibilities was that you have finally to pay a party in the village. They call it ritual. So they said, okay, we need some kind of a community event which allows us to give you the consent for Berlin. Without consent, no contest. So this was the motto.
It's extremely interesting. You said something, cultural belongings is something that I'm learning from you. We are struggling in this museum to make already a transition from objects or artifacts to go into what we call material culture, which makes for us a completely different way of approach, because you have a material culture, you have an immaterial culture. It means also that we don't make that distinctions anymore among artifacts and objects of daily use, because all of them are treated as being fragments of memory, helping us in reconstructing the way that the ancient were organizing their way of living. They are one source, together with literary source, together with what we have lost, which is immaterial, which sometimes with an anthropological approach, even in living communities nowadays, you can deceive some elements that had their ancient origins. And you were perfectly right. I really like when you said that when you are in front of Thutmose III or Ramesses II, you probably feel something, and you also feel, I mean, and it's really written out in their titulary, it's written Sa-Ra, the son of the sun god. So there is this kind of sacrality which we have lost, and somehow it's something very difficult that I want to work on the next, in the coming years, to see how we can give back, even in an archaeological museum, that that we have material culture of sacred significance. That when we, because it's very difficult, you just put a coffin in a showcase, and actually the message that you convey is you are looking at an artifact. And you are forgetting that there was a place of transfiguration, the place where the Mesut, the rebirth, could take place. And all of this significant, the sacrality, which is immediate for us, perceivable in a more contemporary museum where you have Christian or Islamic or Jewish artifacts, because they belong to our common and shared culture, it's more difficult to convey in such an archaeological museum. But it's very important to do. And you were saying, it's very nice in the words that you used, because there was a colleague of us who unfortunately left us just before the summer. Professor Barry Kemp is one of the most important Egyptologists. He wrote a wonderful book, Egypt, Anatomy of Civilization, and in that book he wrote that actually he said ancient Egyptian culture is still alive. How strange it might seem, but when people queue up to go inside an exhibition or inside a museum to see the material culture, it means that these artifacts are still somehow in dialogue and they're still creating a network. And it's something that archaeological museums sometimes tend to forget, but it's something that we have to have clear in mind.
But this means also that you have to prevent explorers from heart attacks, because community representatives want to use these cultural belongings. They want to sit on it, they want to touch on it, they put water on it, they use soil or whatever. But in Canadian museums, so for instance, they slaughtered seals because it's allowed to Inuit communities to do so. So we didn't experience this in the Humboldt Forum, but so how far can we go in a way that we have to unlearn our way also in managing these kind of cultural belongings? Preserving them, of course, but community representatives say, yeah, you preserve it as dead things, but if they are still alive, then you have to handle them also differently.
Yes, and that's sometimes also a huge question that we're facing, of course, also in this country, concerning repatriation, because as you said, we have to change our mindset. So, which is not about preserving the objects as a dead object should put in a showcase, because sometimes a community, the object is going back to, since it's an object of sacred significance, maybe it has to be buried or thrown into the sea or whatever within a ritual, because it's a living part of it. And for us, it's a kind of difficult perspective. So that's why I say that, according to me, it's almost impossible to decolonize a museum. The museum structure as we have it nowadays, of course, has its origin in ancient Athens and in ancient Egypt, but then, of course, was in the 16th century Ulisse Aldrovandi in Bologna, but then the Ashmolean Museum, then the British Museum, and has been born as being a place, the Universal Museum, even though the terms was only used in 1992 for the first time, the place where the collection coming from all over the world would be visible for the European citizens. And it's very difficult to change this approach. It's very difficult to, probably is a radical change, not even using the word museum, defining a new way of functioning within the space. But it's not something, and I completely agree with you, that can be done quite easily, adjust. And sometimes we try to do something just to say we have done something, but really we are only scraping the surface. I mean, it goes quite deeply. And there is a question for you connected to this. In this museum, and you do as well, we do use contemporary art. We invite contemporary artists to make us reflect, make us take out of our comfort zone in difficult questions. So you probably have seen, we invited Ali Sherry and Sarah Salam to be our artists in residence, and they've been, as they should be, completely free and also provocative for us, because the meaning was, okay, you tell your story, you will help us also to get out of our comfort zone, to look at our history, to try to be transparent and to try also to communicate to our public that we have a complex past. Some criticism that museums receive about giving an active role of contemporary artists is that sometimes it's a shortcut, an easy way, in the sense, well, you leave this message to the contemporary artists, but then you go on in doing your business as usual. What is your point of view on this?
Yeah, I think it's an opportunity, but it's also sometimes dangerous, or you can talk about tokenism. So that say, okay, it's difficult, we put it on a media station. This is one thing, or the other one, oh yes, we invite a contemporary artist and she can make something like a commentary to this. I think we have to decide, or we have to discuss how what does it mean contemporary art? Are these diasporic community representatives living in Europe, trained somewhere in the Western world, well established on the Western market, very critical about whatever happens in colonial period, and these are our main partners? Or are we talking about handcraftsmen, weavers, whatever, somewhere in the Amazon or wherever, or in Canada? So I think we have to be very careful not instrumentalizing contemporary art in a way that so they give a critical underline of the permanent exhibition, so it's kind of an excuse. I think the best way for me is inviting artists working with the collections. Because, for instance, we invited an Indian-born photographer now living in London. She's a Naga person, so from an early Christianized minority in Nagaland, which is in the far northeast of India today. And she worked in the collection for half a year. And finally, she came up with a very inspiring presentation of the cultural belongings, her own photographies, and a documentary about current cultural activities and daily life in Nagaland. So combining tradition and digital whatever devices. So to see, okay, because quite often these cultural belongings came to the museum 100 years ago, and so because she wanted to copy or to revitalize our ways of thinking about exoticisms and how beautiful they were dressed and whatever. So her photography brought a very deep insight into the daily life of people now living in Nagaland. So it was a different approach, also a critical one, but it was perhaps there's not a good recipe because it depends from case to case, but at least I think it could be also, as in your gallery, as with what I saw, it's a kind of an eye-opener to see, okay, it is still relevant stuff for contemporary artists. That's also an important message.
A question that I have for you, you discussed earlier about how you're working with communities, how you are working with provenance research, country of origins. Of course, you, as all of us, might be facing difficulties. Do you notice a difference in approach between some activists, maybe from countries of origins, and the diasporic people living in Berlin? I'll try to be more clear in my question. Are there conflicting desires between people who comes from a different place and now they're Germans, they're living in Berlin, and saying, well, these collections are so important for us as a community, and communities at home in the country of origins? Do you experience this conflicting desire or willingness, whether the objects had their legitimate place in Berlin or some others saying, no, they should go home? Because we experience somehow both of them, even within the community living in Italy.
The colonial past or the colonial history of Germany was overshadowed for many, many years by the Nazi period, the division of Germany in the second half of the 20th century, and there was not that much attention given to our colonial past. And perhaps there are some similarities with Italy.
Yeah, only perhaps.
If I
yes,
you
know, a few years ago, we unfortunately, one of the most important scholars of that period, Professor Del Boca, died, and he had come up with a definition which in Italian he called la cripta della memoria, the crypt of memory, where we put all part of difficult past. And there is the new director of Museums of Civilization in Rome, Andrea Vigliani, who's really trying to revive.
Yeah. And yes, and he and his team are doing a fantastic job dealing with this, what they inherited from the Museo del Colonialismo and so on. But I think these scholars are quite important because there were important books written about colonial past, but not well recognized in the wider public. The same with colonial or post-colonial activists. I think they are really important on a local level, on a regional level, reminding us that we are not allowed to forget our colonial past, and we are still in a world of coloniality. That means we have to deal with this ongoing injuries of colonialism in many dimensions. I think, but if you work with communities or with state institutions, first you have to understand that they must make the decisions, not you. You can offer something. You can say, we are ready, we are willing to discuss. But if you are not interested in forcing internal conflicts between different groups, Tanzania, for instance, in Tanzania, they are living around 120 different ethnic groups. And of course, there are tensions between the central government and regional authorities, like in Nigeria or in other parts of Brazil. And of course, minority rights are difficult issues in South America, in Indonesia, and so on and so on. And so, don't be naive or stupid saying, okay, giving something back or working with this group means that's the best way. Because then you are privileged, then you give a privilege to a specific group of people. For instance, they can enter the EU, coming to Berlin, having international experiences, creating their own networks. Why do you work with this group and not with another one? How to make a decision. So it's always very, very sensitive and very, very complex. And of course, you are making mistakes. And one opportunity is to offer something, say, okay, please, can you decide who can come, or can you make an offer how we can go further on? So this is something I think it's also with the diasporic communities, and what I've also learned is that our interest in the colonial past is not automatically a shared interest. So once a colleague from Namibia said to me, oh yes, of course I understand, so you are completely focused on the German colonial period and the colonial past of Germany. It's nice for you, but why should we contribute to this? Because our interest right now is completely different. So, and we want to be reduced and we want to be victimized again. So no, we are much more interested in whatever. So that's also something we have to accept, that not everyone is interested in collaborating with us in terms of colonial German history. And to be honest, when you hear, oh, the German colonial period was not the bad than the British, this is also something I cannot explain in Berlin. So, so this relativism. So it is what I've learned is I've tried to say never again all and ever. So because it is always different.
I have only 2 questions left, because then I want to give the floor to our to the people that are here to listen to you. One question, and it's the last one related to the topic we are discussing. There is a lot of discussion, especially in the Anglo-Saxon world in the United States, but also in the UK, about diversity policy, who should deal with what. Maurizio Bettini was a very important professor in Italy who founded the Department of Anthropology of the Ancient World, has been dealing in one of his last books, who is afraid of of Latin and Greek, dealing with what are we doing? Are we pushing so far? So it's again a provocative questions. How are you dealing with diversity policy within the different departments? And is there an idea that dealing with the Nigeria pass or the Mexican pass, etc., can only be a person coming from that region? Or how would you address this problem that lives in our world nowadays?
Our most diverse team is our cleaning team. So yes, that's a reality. I think this is something we have to learn. We have to continue working on it. So we have a kind of residencies with colleagues from other parts of the world, and of course it's not the privilege running or being in charge of Mexican collection, being Mexican citizen. It is positive if you speak Spanish, by the way. So, yet I think at least our main mission is to bring all these theories and also in terms of diversity to the people on the street. So because we received last year more than 2 million visitors, so it is, and that's our duty, because that's all these ongoing debates in very specialized circles. It's important that they exist, but our mission is to make it accessible to many, many people. And my idea is that we can contribute to that racism in football stadiums is not longer increasing in Germany. So because look at our football teams, how diverse are they? And of course we have, unfortunately, we have racism in football audiences and putting bananas on the ground and so on and so on. And if we can do something against this, then I think we have a really idea of our mission. And I think it is how to find a proper balance, praising and celebrating diversity and keeping social cohesion.
I do agree, and it's very difficult. And well, if the museum had a solution for all of this, we would have an incredible future. Well, that's my last question. You opened in a very difficult period. The pandemic came about, and you were finishing the building and the display, and then the opening was delayed because of the situation we all lived. During the pandemic in Italy, as in Germany, museums were closed for a very long period, and the debate was in the media at the time, in the newspaper, was should we open the museums again? And people were saying, well, if we don't have tourists coming from abroad, why would we open the museums? Because the idea was the museum is a place where you can also earn money and is important for tourism, for the economy, which was something for those who work in a museum very shocking, because of course we are all aware of the importance of the museum within the society and the role that we have for the cities, the society where we live in. And And it was nice, by the way, because when we reopened and there was not international tourism, it was a nice way for the people living in the city to rediscover the museum. Last week we had a celebration of 3 days for the starting of our bicentennial. We opened for 3 days of a road to the city of Turin. While it was snowing, it was cold, so I was afraid nobody would come. 23,000 people came, and it was very nice to see how the city embraced. So the provocative question to you is, do you think that the museum have a future, or do you agree with people that are very negative, that say that we are very dusty and old-fashioned institutions and we don't have a future? While they say that, last year, 2023, was a year where the museum worldwide were the most visited ever, and 2024 is going towards a new record. But do you really think we are engaging enough with new generations, and new generations find their way to the museum, and it remains for them a place of interest, of enhancement of their personality, of learning, of curiosity, of learning how to ask questions and maybe find some answers?
I'm deeply convinced, yes.
Otherwise we would change job.
Yeah, no, I think it is, and even for me, working in this field for some decades right now, it is this also how to keep the curiosity in myself. So this is also something, because the visitors are curious, and we must be curious as well. That means open in a way that we have wonderful locations, we have well-educated staff, we have fantastic collections, and we have the most incredible audiences everywhere in the world. And it doesn't matter if they are tourists or kids from the neighborhood. But I think we have to, so these are the ingredients, to say it this way, but it's on our side to cook it in a different way. So that means also something that doesn't taste delicious, but perhaps it was interesting to cook it and to see, okay, but don't do it as our predecessors did it. I think this is a great opportunity, and and I believe that the visitors are much more open in following us and becoming a more active part than perhaps we sometimes believe.
Well, thank you so much for being with us, and now I leave the floor to some possible questions. Ci sono domande, curiosità, le potete poi porgere anche in italiano, posso eventualmente tradurre io la domanda. A voi l'opportunità di parlare con il direttore dell'Humboldt Forum.
Buonasera. Quando avete aperto questo spazio innovativo, l'avete fatto assieme alla speranza che un giorno potesse essere replicato in altri spazi d'Europa o del mondo?
So, in opening the Humboldt Forum as an innovative space, was it also linked with the hope that this could influence or could be replicated in other parts of Europe or the world?
Yes, there is a hope. But we're also learning from other institutions like the World Museum in Amsterdam or the Museo della Civita in Roma. So, because it is, if we are dealing with this contested stuff in terms of collections mostly taken in the colonial or under the pressure of colonial circumstances, I think it is something we have to learn in a new way. And I can say it only for Germany, so the project Humboldt Forum itself was a kind of an icebreaker and sometimes also a catalyst for the media, for politicians, and also creating a new interest among the audiences, not longer coming because we are presenting so wonderful lacquered panels and what baskets from somewhere in the world, and because people really want to learn more also, and also to unlearn more in terms of sensitive language, for instance. Why shouldn't we use not longer specific terms, or are they still able to do it today? This is also a question. Or is this tradition forgotten? Oh no, it still exists. Or can the museum collection, like the Ark Noah, could be something rescuing over the times and now giving back to communities to re-establish specific facilities or abilities. So I think this is something we can learn from each other, and if it goes good, then we train each other also in a way. I just saw a fantastic exhibition in Amsterdam about gifts, the tradition of making presents. So it's a tradition which connects us worldwide, not only to Christmas. But how does it mean? Do you accept something in return or you don't? So, of course, sometimes I expect something also in return, but it could be a completely no-go in some institutions because a gift is something from your heart without any obligation to someone else. So this is something how to learn in a new way to think about making gifts. So this was fascinating, and I never thought about this. And now packing something for Christmas, now I'm thinking about the different ways of making presents.
Good evening. I'm very interested in knowing how are schools involved in this project, because a student can represent future visitors. So it would be a good means of educating young people, young students.
Yes, of course, we are offering a wide range of education programs. But we are not alone in Berlin. We are a newcomer, and we try to do something new or specific. We are focusing on preschool kids. So we start with 2 years up to 6 years. And so important thing is transcultural learning. So that's the main message. And we are focusing not only on this, we call it Kita kids, so preschool kids, because they are not traveling from over distances but we are offering specific training courses for people working in the nurseries, because they are facing the reality that they have many kids from many different cultural backgrounds, and how to explain a girl from the Ukraine that their Christmas is 1 week later than ours, if this kid is 3 years old. And people are working in these nurseries are not prepared for this. And so we understand ourselves as also a kind of a training camp for people working there.
We have one online. A person is asking, how do you to welcome many cultures without giving up on our roots, how to maintain the balance?
Sorry, what?
Yeah, I mean, about winter market, how to welcome many cultures, many different cultures without giving up on the identity, if I correctly interpret.
It's something which is very living at the moment in this country, the idea of identity, national identity, against or compared to a global identity.
I accepting you and your identity, whatever it means and where it comes from, but please accept my identity. So it starts with the fact that I was raised in the East, and many of my colleagues are raised in the West. So it starts with us on the national level in Germany. So I think talking is the only opportunity, talking and accepting, and being in a way modest, and not superior in the way that you say, okay, I'm better or faster or whatever than you. So don't compare. And this means also a forum means that you have to fix your rules. That to see, okay, we are a space free of racism and discrimination, so that means don't talk badly about somebody else. Ask perhaps if you don't understand something. And say, okay, that's not familiar for me, and I have difficulty to understand that you are coming from a country or an area where women have not the same rights as men. Just recently, a loan contract was refused to us because it was signed by my colleague, my deputy. She's a woman. And her signature was not accepted because it was a signature by a woman. So, what can I do? Finally, we signed both, and we wrote a letter and said, okay, we accept that in your culture, in your tradition, in your behavior, you deal it this way. Please accept that it is not our way, because women and men have the same rights, have equal rights, and that is why we signed it both. So it is something we have to explain, but we also have to accept. And this is something without charging and say, okay, it's not, oh, they are so old-fashioned and they are so back behind us. So perhaps we have to accept that we are living in a multipolar world, that also it's difficult for me to accept this, to be honest, but I'm also trying to learn it again, to say, okay, there are many gods, and who is praising to whom, it depends.
You know, there is one of our colleagues, is a Swedish archaeologist, Böström, that wrote a very nice book about how archaeology can become a civic element, teaching us a lot. And he comes up with the idea we shouldn't, when we talk within archaeology, we shouldn't define a certain space other than residency. And we are all temporary residents, so we are do not have autochtone or people, newcomers. We are all newcomers, because either in time or in space, we come to a place which is a common residence, and the common residence has some rules that are given by a residence, and that we all have to respect in order to give it as intact as possible to the coming generation. And I like the idea that the museum can be also the place where you meet the other chronologically or from a topographic point of view, and also teaches you to put yourself in a relative position. Your kind of ideas are not absolute, they are relative, and as you say, I do it this way and you do another way, and we have to meet each other somehow in the middle.
Yes, and the idea of nationality is very late,
yes,
and very exceptional ideas. In most times and regions, there was always people with different attitudes, languages, traditions living together or communicating. So East Africa was not isolated from the Arab Peninsula or India for millenniums, just before the Portuguese came. So, and don't follow these ideas of nationalism, because it is more or less an exception in world history.
Well, thank you again for being here. Thank you for your wonderful lecture.